the festive, slightly chaotic symphony of the Willow Creek Springs community. Potluck, the clatter of serving spoons against heavy ceramic dishes, the low murmur of at least 50 overlapping conversations, the bright, shrieking laughter of children weaving like miniature comets between adult legs, was violently, unforgettably punctuated by a sound that clawed its way through the cheerful din, a raw, agonized scream. Michael Chen, a man whose entire career was built on meticulously analyzing chaos, on finding immutable scientific order in the destructive aftermath of explosions, chemical spills, and deliberate sabotage, felt his blood turn to viscous ice. That scream, primal and sharp with unbearable pain, was his daughter's, Olivia. He spun around his body, reacting a fraction of a second before his conscious mind fully processed the horror. His senses, honed by years of sifting through wreckage for minute clues, instantly flared his gaze, sweeping the crowded community hall with practiced forensic intensity. Olivia's scream, scalding soup, her belly. The three phrases seared into his brain like a flash burn. He saw her, or rather the horrifying tableau that would forever be etched into his memory. Olivia, his vibrant, joyfully 7 months pregnant daughter, was stumbling backwards, her hands flying instinctively to her chest and abdomen, her face a mask of utter shock and excruciating, uncomprehending pain. A large, ornate, cream-colored soup tureen, previously steaming innocuously on the main food table, lay overturned at her feet, its contents. A thick, steaming crimson liquid that looked like a rich tomato bisque, splashed with brutal artistry across the pristine white tablecloth, and more horrifyingly clinging with obscene tenacity to Olivia's pretty floral maternity dress, her bare arms, her beautifully rounded belly. Steam, thick and acrid, rose from the saturated fabric, and the sharp, metallic, almost chemical scent of scalded flesh, unmistakably laced with something unnaturally pungent and peppery, began to cut through the comforting homespun aromas of baked goods and casseroles. Standing frozen for a split second, a look of bizarre, almost righteous indignation etched onto her usually composed features, before it morphed with practiced speed into a mask of feigned shock, was Karen Bishop, the HOA's self-appointed, undisputed matriarch of micromanagement. Then the world, which had seemed to hold its breath, exploded into frantic motion. Michael reached Olivia, his heart pounding a violent tattoo against his ribs, pushing through the suddenly silent, horrified crowd, just as her husband Liam did. "Liv. Oh God, Liv, I'm here, don't move." Liam's voice, usually so calm and steady, was raw with panic and disbelief, his face paling to a ghastly white beneath his summer tan. Olivia was sobbing, incoherent with pain, her body already starting to tremble uncontrollably. "It burns, oh God, my baby, it burns." She cried, her voice hoarse and broken, her hands instinctively, futilely trying to shield her stomach from the searing heat. Michael's eyes, trained to observe and record minute details in disaster zones, took in the entire catastrophic scene in a series of rapid, analytical snapshots, the specific angle and force of the spill indicated by the elongated splash patterns on the floor and Olivia's dress, the sheer quantity of the scalding liquid, the intense, visible heat still radiating from the soaked fabric, the unnatural, irritating quality of the steam that stung his own nostrils, and Karen Bishop, now exclaiming loudly, her voice a carefully calibrated performance of distress. "Oh my goodness, I tripped. The tablecloth, it must have caught my heel. The clumsy girl, she just walked right into me as I was turning. I'm so sorry." Her eyes, however, darted around, assessing the crowd's reaction, not Olivia's agony. But Michael, his hearing preternaturally sharp in moments of crisis, had also caught a fragment of something else. Something Karen had spat out in that infinitesimal moment of the incident. A venomous hiss almost entirely lost in Olivia's initial piercing scream. "Teach her to be on time, waltzing in so late." The words, juxtaposed with the scene of unimaginable agony, ignited a cold, precise, and deeply personal rage in Michael. He remembered Olivia just last week, her face alight with maternal excitement, excitedly showing him a whimsical pencil sketch of a little girl with bright, intelligent eyes, holding hands with a smiling, slightly lopsided stick-figure grandpa under the carefully lettered caption, "Lily and Grandpa's Big Day Out." The innocence of that drawing, the precious, hopeful future it represented, felt like it was being deliberately, sadistically seared away, along with his daughter's delicate skin. This was no accident. This was targeted. The central question formed in his professional mind with chilling clarity, even as his father's heart fractured. What kind of monster would deliberately methodically use boiling possibly adulterated soup to discipline a heavily pregnant woman for the utterly trivial offense of tardiness? And how, dear God, could he prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt? Michael Chen's life was a study in controlled precision, a stark, necessary contrast to the volatile, often lethal elements he routinely investigated. As a senior investigator for the state's Special Forensic Unit specializing in firearms explosives and hazardous liquids, he dealt daily with the messy, brutal aftermath of human malice and catastrophic negligence. His days were spent sifting through charred rubble, painstakingly analyzing burn patterns, identifying unknown chemical residues, and testifying in court with an unflappable evidence-based certainty that had sent many a perpetrator to prison. His home life, however, was his sanctuary, the calm eye in his professional storm. A widower having lost his beloved wife Sarah to a sudden aggressive illness years ago, a loss that had carved a permanent hollow in his soul and fueled his almost ferocious protectiveness over Olivia. His bond with their only child was exceptionally close, a lifeline of love and shared memories. The fear of failing to protect his remaining family, of experiencing that kind of devastating loss, again haunted him, a dull, persistent ache that sharpened into acute anxiety in moments like these. Olivia, a talented and increasingly successful architect, and her husband Liam, an equally kind-hearted and intelligent software engineer, lived in the same sprawling, leafy suburban community, Willow Creek Springs, primarily so Olivia could be near her father, as they anticipated the arrival of their first child, Michael's first grandchild, Lily. He was ecstatic, already planning elaborate fishing trips, though he hadn't fished in years, and currently assembling a ridiculously oversized, impossibly soft teddy bear in his spare room. A room Olivia had already sketched dreamily in her notebook as Lily's First Kingdom, complete with hand-painted murals of friendly woodland creatures. Olivia and Liam were well loved in the community, known for their gentle natures, their ready smiles, and their unhesitating willingness to lend a hand. They weren't usually the types to run afoul of anyone, which made the simmering, often petty animosity from Karen Bishop, and to a lesser, more passive-aggressive extent from Robert Maxwell, all the more perplexing and infuriating to Michael. Karen Bishop was the undisputed self-crowned queen of the Willow Creek Springs Homeowners Association, a woman whose iron will and encyclopedic, near-photographic knowledge of the HOA bylaws were legendary and often insufferable. She patrolled the neighborhood in her silent electric golf cart, a clipboard her scepter, her sharp, critical eyes missing no perceived infraction, a trash can left out an hour too long, post-collection, a hedge trimmed a quarter-inch too short according to aesthetic guidelines, a child's brightly colored bicycle leaning against the wrong HOA unapproved tree. Her pronouncements, often delivered in a tone of pained condescension, were presented as absolute authority, backed by a thinly veiled disdain for anyone who didn't meet her exacting, often arbitrary standards. She'd once cornered a new, visibly flustered neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a sweet, timid woman who collected garden gnomes and spent a full 10 minutes loudly dissecting why her choice of a particularly cheerful fishing rod-wielding gnome was an egregious affront to communal aesthetic sensibilities and a violation of Bylaw 17, subsection C, paragraph 4. Most residents, weary of her constant critiques and the official jargon-laden warning letters that inevitably followed, simply tried to stay out of her way. Karen had once confided in another long-suffering neighbor, her voice tight with a startling raw bitterness that surprised the listener. "I lost everything, because of someone who didn't respect time, who thought deadlines were mere suggestions. Some people just don't understand that tardiness is a form of theft, a profound, insidious disrespect that can ruin lives. Mine was, and I will not tolerate it in others." The vehemence had been shocking. The first significant clash between Karen Bishop and Olivia, a clear harbinger of the escalating tension, had occurred a month before the potluck. Olivia, then in the full throes of early third trimester fatigue, had been a few minutes late arriving for her volunteer shift at the community garden, a project Karen oversaw with the precision and rigidity of a drill sergeant. Karen, instead of a quiet word, had publicly berated Olivia in front of the other half-dozen volunteers, her voice sharp with condescension. Punctuality. Mrs. Walker is not merely a suggestion, it is a cornerstone of respect and community responsibility. Your tardiness, yet again, demonstrates a distinct lack of both. If you cannot commit to the agreed-upon schedule, perhaps your energies are better spent elsewhere where such laxity is tolerated. Olivia, her face flushed with embarrassment, but determined not to cause a larger scene, had apologized quietly and tried to make amends by working twice as hard weeding the tomato beds. Michael, hearing about it later from a distressed Olivia, had been furious. She had no right to speak to you like that, Liv. It's a volunteer garden, for God's sake, not a boot camp for delinquents. Olivia, ever the peacemaker, had waved it off, though her eyes were shadowed with hurt. It's okay, Dad. She's just particular. Very, very particular. I'll be extra careful to be on time from now on. Adding to the undercurrent of simmering community tension was Robert Maxwell, a perpetually disgruntled and self-important architect whose own local practice was rumored to be struggling and who also served rather ineffectually on the HOA board. Olivia, with her growing reputation for innovative and aesthetically pleasing designs, had recently very politely and diplomatically declined his unsolicited and rather condescending offer to design their nursery and a small porch extension. Thank you so much, Robert. That's very generous, she'd said, but I'm really looking forward to tackling this project myself. It's quite personal for me. Robert, his ego clearly bruised, had taken it as a personal slight. Some people are too proud or perhaps too inexperienced to accept professional help even when it's offered charitably. He'd grumbled to another board member, Martin Henderson, loud enough for Olivia, who was nearby, to overhear. He'd been cool and pointedly distant to Olivia ever since. Michael had seen Robert hovering near the microwave station at the Potluck earlier, looking agitated and muttering to himself after apparently tasting something from a communal dish with a disposable spoon. In the weeks leading up to the Potluck, Karen's behavior towards Olivia had subtly but unmistakably escalated from mere officiousness to targeted harassment. The pool incident had been particularly galling and public, Olivia, seeking some gentle, buoyant relief from the summer heat and the increasing weight of her pregnancy, enjoyed slow, careful swims in the community pool. One sweltering afternoon, as she was about to enter the cool water, Karen Bishop intercepted her, holding up a laminated copy of the pool rules like a prohibitive shield. Mrs. Walker, Karen announced, her voice pitched loud enough for several nearby residents lounging on sunbeds to hear clearly. Rule 7B clearly states, appropriate swimwear required. That voluminous maternity contraption you're wearing is hardly appropriate. It's rather excessive and, frankly, not in keeping with the streamlined, family-friendly aesthetic we strive to maintain here. Olivia's modest navy blue one-piece maternity swimsuit was perfectly standard, even elegant. Karen's objection was transparently personal and designed to humiliate. Furthermore, Karen continued, her voice rising with self-righteous authority. Given your advanced condition and your previously demonstrated disregard for community timeliness and general awareness, I'm seriously concerned about your ability to safely use these facilities without causing undue disruption or requiring special assistance. Which I must remind you, our volunteer lifeguards are not equipped or insured to provide for high-risk individuals. She effectively barred Olivia from the pool, implying she was both an eyesore and a potential liability. Olivia, shaken her eyes, stinging with unshed tears, had simply turned and left the curious, pitying stares of other swimmers burning into her back. When Michael found out from a distraught Olivia later that evening, he'd wanted to confront Karen directly to unleash the full force of his protective fury. But Olivia, ever the peacekeeper and increasingly anxious about any form of conflict or stress during her pregnancy, had begged him not to. Please, Dad, it will only make her worse. She'll find some other way to retaliate. I'll just avoid the pool. It's not worth the stress. Not for me, not for Lily. The second incident, a clear act of coercion and public shaming, came via an HOA-wide email penned by Karen Bishop with her characteristic passive-aggressive flourish. A small decorative terracotta planter Olivia had placed on her front porch, filled with cheerful yellow and purple pansies, had apparently been knocked over during a particularly windy night, spilling some potting soil onto the walkway. Before Olivia or Liam even had a chance to notice and clean it up the next morning, Liam had left for work early, and Olivia was moving more slowly these days. Karen's email blast landed in every resident's inbox. Under the subject line, Urgent, Maintaining Community Standards and Property Upkeep. A necessary reminder. Karen wrote without naming Olivia directly, but with unmistakable pointed implication. It has come to the HOA's attention that certain residents are exhibiting a regrettable and consistent failure to maintain their property in a manner consistent with our community's established high standards. Unsightly spills, unkempt debris, and a general lack of attentiveness to one's immediate surroundings not only detract significantly from our neighborhood's collective aesthetic appeal, but also reflect poorly on the individual homeowner's respect for their neighbors and their commitment to shared community values. Prompt cleanup of any such messes is not a mere suggestion, but an explicit requirement under Bylaw 23, Section A. Failure to comply will result in official warnings, followed by escalating fines as per the established fee schedule. Let us all strive to take pride in our beautiful Willow Creek Springs and ensure it remains a desirable place to live for everyone. The email, with its capitalized urgency and officious tone, was a thinly veiled attack designed to shame Olivia and Liam publicly and to pressure them into a state of hypervigilance. Several sympathetic neighbors had quietly expressed their disgust to Michael, acknowledging that Karen was wildly out of line, but no one dared challenge her publicly. Karen's power, built on a foundation of relentless intimidation and the meticulous, unyielding enforcement of petty rules, seemed absolute, unassailable. A week before the potluck, the harassment took an even more sinister turn. An anonymous typed note appeared in Olivia and Liam's mailbox, slipped inside a plain white envelope with no stamp, "Be on time, or you'll pay the price." Some people don't tolerate disrespect. Consider this your only warning. The block lettering was crude, the message chilling. Olivia had been terrified, her hands trembling as she showed it to Michael. "Dad, what if it's her? What if she's serious?" Michael, deeply unsettled by the escalation, had immediately installed a discreet high-resolution security camera overlooking their front porch and driveway, though it offered no coverage of communal areas like the hall where the potluck was to be held. He'd also had a quiet, unofficial word with Detective Harding, merely stating he had some concerns about escalating neighborhood disputes and wanted to know the best way to document things should they worsen. The potluck itself was an annual community-building event, one Karen meticulously, almost obsessively organized. Olivia, determined not to give Karen any further ammunition, had signed up to bring her famous 7-layer dip, a crowd favorite. However, a last-minute, unavoidable urgent work call for Liam had delayed their departure. They had arrived perhaps 15, maybe 20 minutes after the official start time, Olivia flustered and deeply apologetic, as she navigated her way carefully through the throng towards the food tables. Michael, who had arrived earlier to help set up some chairs, watched Karen Bishop's eyes narrow like a hawk's as Olivia approached her, expression tightening with visible disapproval. He'd seen Karen make a sharp, critical comment to Olivia about her late arrival, something about flagrant disregard for schedules and common courtesy, and Olivia, looking utterly mortified, murmuring another sincere apology before trying to find a space for her dip amidst the already laden tables. That had been mere moments before the devastating accident. Sicht. The immediate aftermath of the scalding was a blur of panicked shouts, crying children seeking their parents, and the frantic, often clumsy efforts of bystanders to help. Someone with rudimentary medical training began calling for cool water and clean cloths, their voice high-pitched with alarm. Liam, his face ashen, his hands shaking, was trying to soothe Olivia, murmuring incoherent reassurances. Michael's mind, however, was already working, processing the scene with the dispassionate, analytical precision of an investigator at a complex crime scene. He noted the specific trajectory of the soup, not a wide, arcing splash indicative of a dropped tureen, but a more concentrated directed deluge primarily onto Olivia's front as if aimed. He saw the position of Karen Bishop's feet relative to the table leg she supposedly tripped over. It seemed an unlikely, almost physically impossible stumble from that angle. He registered the intense heat, the way the thick, viscous liquid clung stubbornly to fabric, maximizing thermal transfer and burn potential, and that sharp, unusually peppery, irritating odor that wasn't typical of tomato bisque. This wasn't just hot soup. This was a deliberately deployed weapon. Paramedics arrived with practiced, almost calming urgency, their calm efficiency, a stark contrast to the surrounding chaos. They carefully began to treat Olivia's burns, administering pain relief and gently irrigating the affected areas with copious amounts of sterile saline. Michael relayed Olivia's pregnancy, the exact number of weeks, the need for extreme caution, with medications, his voice tight and low, with controlled fury. He watched his gut clenching as they meticulously cut away the soaked fabric of her dress, revealing angry, rapidly reddening welts already beginning to blister ominously on her arms, her chest, and terrifyingly across the vulnerable, swollen curve of her abdomen. The pain in Olivia's eyes, a raw, naked agony, was a physical blow to Michael. "Dad!" she gasped, her hand slick with sweat and spilled soup reaching for him, her voice thin and reedy. "The baby. Is Lily going to be okay?" I felt her kick just before. I was so scared for Lily. He squeezed her hand, his own heart constricting with a pain that mirrored hers. "They'll take the best care of you both, sweetheart. I promise. Lily will have a safe world, my love. We'll make sure of it." As the paramedics prepared to transport Olivia to the specialized burn unit at County General Michaels, gaze cold and hard as flint found Karen Bishop. She was surrounded by a small group of her usual cronies, dabbing at her eyes with a pristine lace handkerchief, playing the part of the distraught, unfortunate victim of a terrible accident. "It was terrible, just terrible," she was saying, her voice quavering with well-rehearsed false emotion. "I feel simply awful. I would never intentionally harm anyone, especially not a pregnant woman. It was just a dreadful, clumsy mishap." Michael felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. Oh, he would see about that. He made a quick, discreet call to a trusted colleague at the local police department, Detective Miles Harding, a man he'd worked with on several complex cases. Harding Michael Chen. "I need a full forensics team at the Willow Creek Springs Community Hall on Elm Street. Now. And secure the scene meticulously. This is an assault possibly aggravated with a chemical agent. The victim is my pregnant daughter, Olivia Walker." While Olivia was rushed to the hospital, Liam white-faced and silent with shock by her side in the ambulance, Michael remained at the community hall, his investigator's instincts overriding his overwhelming paternal distress. Detective Harding and a uniformed team arrived quickly, efficiently cordoning off the area around the food tables with yellow crime scene tape. Michael, careful not to contaminate any potential evidence before the official forensic unit arrived, began his own preliminary visual assessment, his eyes and mind working in tandem, cataloging every detail. He focused on the soup tureen itself, a heavy, ornate ceramic vessel. It was on its side, a substantial amount of the viscous crimson liquid still pooled inside and splattered on the floor. He noted the temperature of the remaining soup by holding his hand near it. It was still incredibly unusually hot, much hotter than typical serving temperature for a potluck dish, especially one that had been out for a while. Had Karen deliberately excessively overheated it? He examined the tablecloth, the spatter patterns on the floor, the nearby chairs. The main trajectory was clearly onto Olivia, but there were secondary splashes indicating a forceful projection rather than a simple gravity spill from a fall. He then looked again at Karen Bishop, who was being questioned by a uniformed officer, still volubly maintaining her accidental trip story, embellishing it with details of a loose floorboard and a wobbly table leg. He noted her expensive cream-colored silk blouse. If she had merely tripped and spilled the soup forward, her front would likely be significantly stained, possibly even scalded, if the heat was as intense as it seemed. But her blouse was pristine, except for that small, almost imperceptible damp patch on her right cuff, and a very faint discoloration just above it, as if she had shielded her hand and forearm while guiding the turene's contents. Near where Robert Maxwell had been observed, standing earlier close to the food tables and the row of community-use microwave ovens, Michael spotted a crumpled, expensive-looking dark gray linen handkerchief, partially tucked under a chair. It looked out of place amidst the paper napkins. Using a clean pen from his pocket to nudge it into better view, he noted it smelled faintly but distinctly of the tomato soup and that same pungent, peppery, irritating odor. He made a mental note to point it out to Davies. He then discreetly spoke to a few witnesses who had been close by and weren't being mobbed by Karen's theatrics. Mrs. Gable, the timid gnome enthusiast, approached him, her face pale, her voice trembling almost uncontrollably. "Mr. Chen," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously towards Karen Bishop. "Oh, I have to tell you. I heard what Mrs. Bishop said just before Olivia screamed. She said clear as day under her breath, but I heard it. She said something like, 'This will teach you about being late, you inconsiderate little.'" And then Olivia cried out. And I saw her near the microwave with that big soup tureen just a few minutes before Olivia and Liam arrived. She seemed to be heating it for a long, long time. She looked furious, muttering to herself. I thought it was odd to heat soup that much for a potluck. This was crucial. Premeditation. Intent. The discipline for walking late comment, now corroborated combined with the suspicious prolonged heating of the soup and the physical evidence of the spill pattern, began to paint a damning, horrifying picture. Michael's specialized knowledge of liquids, their properties, their dynamics, how they behaved under force, and when heated, especially when potentially adulterated, was now his most powerful weapon. He knew how to analyze flow rates, spatter patterns, thermal injuries, and chemical irritants. This wasn't just soup. It was a liquid agent deliberately weaponized to inflict maximum pain and harm. Olivia was admitted to the specialized burn unit at County General, her injuries officially assessed as second-degree burns, covering approximately 15% of her body with critical full-thickness areas across her abdomen directly over where Lily was nestled. The doctors were gravely concerned, not only about the intense pain and high risk of infection for Olivia, but also about the potential for the trauma and physiological stress to induce premature labor, which could be catastrophic for Lily at this stage. Michael stayed by her bedside for hours, holding her hand when she could bear to be touched, his heart aching with every pained whimper she made, even in her heavily sedated sleep. Liam was a rock pale but astonishingly steady, never leaving Olivia's other side, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror, love, and a slowly hardening resolve. The waiting listening to the quiet beeps of monitors, the hushed voices of nurses, was an agonizing torment for Michael, each minute stretching into an eternity. Finally, late that night, Dr. Albright, the calm authoritative chief obstetrician, came in to speak with them. "Mr. Chen Liam," she said, her expression cautiously optimistic, but still deeply serious. "Olivia is stable for now. We've managed her pain as best we can, and the burn team is doing excellent work. As for the baby, Lily is a little fighter. Her heartbeat is strong and regular, and so far there are no definitive signs of fetal distress or premature labor. But I must be frank, Olivia has sustained a significant physiological insult. She must remain completely stress-free, which is of course a monumental task under these circumstances. The next few days are absolutely critical for both of them. Relief immense and overwhelming washed over Michael, so potent it almost buckled his knees. But it was immediately followed by a renewed surge of cold, righteous fury. Karen Bishop had not only viciously assaulted his daughter, she had deliberately knowingly endangered his grandchild. He would not rest, would not sleep, would not eat until she faced the full, unmitigated consequences of her actions. The next morning, a grim-faced Michael met with Detective Harding and the lead forensic investigator assigned to the case, a sharp, highly competent young woman named Specialist Tara Davies, who had a growing reputation for her meticulous work with trace evidence. He laid out his preliminary observations in precise, dispassionate detail: the unusually high temperature of the soup, the directed nature of the spill, Karen's pristine clothing versus the small telling dampness and discoloration on her cuff, Mrs. Gable's crucial testimony about the overheard comment and the microwave use and the peculiar, irritating, peppery odor of the soup. He then handed over the carefully bagged linen handkerchief he'd recovered. This was found near where another individual, Robert Maxwell, an HOA board member who has had previous friction with my daughter, was standing. It smells of the soup and the same irritant. Maxwell should be looked at, if only to eliminate him or understand his potential involvement, however minor. This wasn't an accidental spill from a trip, Davies Michael stated, his voice devoid of overt emotion, all professional, though his eyes were chips of ice. The fluid dynamics are entirely inconsistent with that scenario. This was a targeted discharge of a superheated, and I strongly suspect chemically adulterated liquid. In my field, we call that an assault with a hazardous thermal and chemical agent. Davies, initially perhaps a little intimidated by Michael's formidable reputation and his intense personal involvement, listened intently, her respect visibly growing as he detailed his methodical analysis. The spatter on the victim indicates a high-velocity projection from a low angle, consistent with the tureen being deliberately tilted and forcefully pushed, not simply dropped or knocked over. The lack of significant splashback on Mrs. Bishop, combined with that cuff mark, strongly suggests she may have used her hand and forearm to direct the flow and simultaneously shield herself. We need to examine her clothing meticulously under high magnification, look for trace evidence, compare any soup residue with samples from the scene and the victim's clothing, and get a precise temperature reading from a similar quantity of soup heated in that specific community hall microwave for the duration Mrs. Gable witnessed. We also need a full chemical breakdown of that soup, looking for unexpected irritants or accelerants. His expertise was undeniable, his reasoning impeccable. Detective Harding nodded, his expression grim. "We'll bring Mrs. Bishop in for formal questioning again later today. This time, she'll have a lot more to answer for than a simple clumsy moment. We'll also have a chat with Mr. Maxwell." Just before they were set to bring Karen Bishop in for her second, more pointed interview, Michael, who was at the hospital checking on Olivia, received an anonymous text message on his personal cell phone. "Accidents happen. Sometimes people get what they deserve. Stay out of it if you know what's good for you. Some things are best left undisturbed." His blood ran cold. An accomplice. Or Karen foolishly trying to intimidate him further, he immediately forwarded it to Harding with a note. Received 11:32 a.m. Unidentified number, likely a burner. This just got uglier. Harding's reply was swift, acknowledged. Adds another layer. "Be careful, Michael." The confrontation, or rather the formal interrogation, came not at an HOA meeting, but in the stark, sterile environment of Interview Room B at the police station. An interview Michael was allowed to observe from behind a one-way mirror, a professional courtesy extended by Harding, who understood the nuances of Michael's unique position as both victim's father and expert consultant. Karen Bishop arrived with her high-powered, expensive-looking lawyer, still radiating an air of deeply offended dignity, clearly believing she was the unfortunate victim of a gross misunderstanding and perhaps even a malicious conspiracy. Detective Harding began calmly, patiently recapping Karen's initial statement, her voice neutral. Then she introduced Specialist Davies, who methodically, unemotionally presented the preliminary forensic findings, the detailed analysis of the spill patterns, indicating a deliberate pour, not a fall. The thermal imaging estimates, placing the soup's temperature at well over 200 degrees Celsius, significantly exceeding normal serving safety by a dangerous margin. Mrs. Gable's clear corroborated witness testimony of the overheard threat and the prolonged, angry microwave use. Karen's composure began to visibly crack. Her lawyer interjected frequently with loud, blustering objections about speculation and hearsay, but the weight of the meticulously gathered evidence was mounting a suffocating pressure. Then Harding played a clear audio recording of Mrs. Gable's statement, her timid but firm voice, recounting Karen's damning words and actions, clear and damning. Karen's face paled to a mottled, unhealthy white. "She's lying. That woman has always disliked me. She's jealous of my position in the community. It was an accident. I tripped. The floor is uneven there," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch, becoming shrill. "Then perhaps you can explain this." Mrs. Bishop Harding said, her voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous level as she slid a series of enlarged forensic photos across the table. The first was a magnified image of Karen's silk blouse cuff, showing faint but definite traces of a specific food-grade thickener found in the soup, alongside undeniable microscopic traces of capsaicin oil and crystalline salt particles. The second showed microscopic heat-induced stress marks and slight melting on the synthetic fibers of her cuff, consistent with brief shielded contact with extreme heat. And then there's the chemical analysis of the soup itself. Harding continued, placing another report on the table. Forensics found an extremely high concentration of capsaicin oil, the active component in chili peppers, and granular sodium chloride, common table salt, in the soup recovered from Mrs. Walker's dress, the tureen, and the spill site, far, far beyond any conceivable culinary use. These substances, Specialist Davies confirms, would significantly increase the burning sensation, the depth of tissue damage, and the overall potential for severe prolonged injury. Karen stared at the reports, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly agape. Her lawyer began to protest again, but Karen suddenly shrieked, lunging across the table, trying to snatch the damning photos. "You're framing me. It was an accident. Robert Maxwell he was near the soup. He put that stuff in it. He was angry with Olivia, too." Officers, anticipating such a move, quickly and gently restrained her. In the commotion, as she struggled, a small folded piece of thick, cream-colored notepaper fell from her designer handbag, unnoticed by her in her histrionics. Harding calmly picked it up. It was a neatly, almost obsessively handwritten note in Karen's distinctive, spiky calligraphy. Punctuality is respect. Tardiness is theft of precious time and a sign of contempt. Consequences will follow for those who steal and show contempt. Michael watched from behind the one-way mirror, his heart a cold, hard drum of impending justice. He felt no triumph, only a profound, weary sadness at the depth of such calculated malice. Robert Maxwell was brought in later that afternoon. He was visibly terrified, his initial bluster gone. He readily admitted to being near the tureen earlier in the day, even tasting the soup with a spare plastic spoon and wiping his mouth on his linen handkerchief, which he then carelessly discarded, admitting he could be a bit messy. It was bland then, if anything. He insisted, his voice shaking. I swear I didn't add anything to it. I wouldn't. Yes, I was annoyed with Olivia about the gazebo design, a professional disagreement, but this is monstrous. I wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone a pregnant woman. His alibi for the exact time of the prolonged microwave heating was corroborated by several other HOA members, who confirmed he was on the other side of the hall, passionately and loudly debating new parking regulations. The handkerchief appeared to be an unfortunate coincidence of proximity, perhaps even a deliberate attempt by Karen to misdirect, though that couldn't be proven. He seemed genuinely shocked and appalled by the details of the assault. The arrest warrant for Karen Bishop was issued the next day. The charges were severe aggravated assault with a dangerous instrument, the superheated chemically adulterated soup assault causing significant bodily harm, and felony reckless endangerment of an unborn child. The anonymous text message, while untraceable to her directly due to the burner phone being wiped, added to the narrative of premeditation and a disturbing level of cunning. The news sent shockwaves of disbelief and horror through the usually placid Willow Creek Springs. The HOA board immediately convened an emergency session where a shaken and ashamed Martin Henderson, the vice president, announced that Karen Bishop was summarily stripped of all her titles and responsibilities effective immediately. In the following days, many residents previously cowed into silence by Karen now came forward with their own stories of her bullying. Her intimidation tactics, her obsessive focus on petty infractions, creating a chorus of condemnation that painted a picture of a woman whose need for control had spiraled into dangerous delusion. Olivia's recovery was slow, arduous, and excruciatingly painful. The burns, particularly on her abdomen, required meticulous daily care to prevent infection and minimize scarring. She was incredibly brave, enduring the painful debridement and dressing changes with a quiet fortitude that amazed her doctors, but the emotional trauma ran deep. Nightmares plagued her sleep, vivid, terrifying replays of the searing pain, Karen's distorted face, the fear for Lily. She developed a temporary agoraphobia, a fear of crowded places, the cheerful din of the potluck, now a trigger for panic. Liam was her constant, unwavering support, his love a soothing balm on her raw wounds, both physical and emotional. He rarely left her side, reading to her, helping with her care, his quiet strength a bulwark against her despair. Michael visited every day, his presence a quiet reassurance, his unspoken promise of justice a source of strength for them all. The community, shocked into action, rallied around them in a way that surprised and deeply touched Michael. Meals appeared on their doorstep, daily offers of help to run errands, clean the house, or simply sit with Olivia poured in. A fund was started by Mrs. Gable and some of the other ladies from the garden club to help with medical expenses not covered by insurance. The genuine kindness and solidarity of her neighbors was a powerful antidote to the bitterness of Karen's calculated cruelty. Karen Bishop's trial was a local sensation, drawing media attention from across the state. Her high-priced defense attorney attempted to paint her as a dedicated, civic-minded volunteer who, under immense stress from her HOA responsibilities, made a terrible, clumsy mistake, perhaps overzealous in her reheating of the soup, but certainly not malicious. They tried to deflect blame onto Robert Maxwell, or even suggest Olivia herself was somehow contributorily negligent. But Michael Chen's expert testimony on the fluid dynamics, thermal properties, and chemical composition of the soup, delivered with calm, irrefutable scientific precision, systematically, devastatingly dismantled that defense. He explained with diagrams and precise calculations how the spill could not have occurred, as Karen described how the heat and chemical additives were deliberately maximized for harm. Combined with the damning eyewitness accounts, Specialist Davies' corroborating forensic evidence, the handwritten note found in Karen's purse, and evidence of the burner phone purchase, traced to a cash transaction at a store Karen frequented the prosecution, led by a sharp ADA named Maria Sanchez, built an unshakable, overwhelming case. The jury, after only a few hours of deliberation, found Karen Bishop guilty on all major counts. In her sentencing, the judge, a stern, experienced jurist named Eleanor Vance, condemned Karen's callous, cruel, and premeditated act of violence, born from a twisted obsession and a shocking abuse of her community position, masked with despicable hypocrisy, as an unfortunate accident. Karen received a significant prison sentence, the maximum allowed for several of the charges, and a permanent no-contact restraining order preventing her from ever approaching or communicating with Olivia Liam Michael or Lily again. A subsequent civil suit, efficiently handled, ensured that Karen's considerable assets, including her meticulously maintained house in Willow Creek Springs, were used to cover Olivia's extensive past and future medical bills, and to establish a substantial trust fund for Lily's education and future. Harding called Michael after the sentencing. "We've got her, Chen. Justice served. She's done." For the first time in months, Michael felt a sliver of the immense weight on his shoulders begin to lift. Months later, the pervasive clinical scent of antiseptic and burn cream finally faded from Olivia's life, replaced by the sweet, powdery, unmistakably lovely aroma of a newborn. Lily Grace Walker arrived into the world a few weeks early, but small, perfectly formed, and remarkably healthy, her lusty, indignant cries, a beautiful symphony to her relieved family's ears. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, feeling her tiny, perfect fingers grasp his own, Michael felt a profound, bone-deep sense of peace and overwhelming gratitude that eclipsed the lingering anger and the raw memory of trauma. The ordeal had been a crucible, forging even stronger, unbreakable bonds within their family, and surprisingly, within their wider community. Olivia, though she would always carry the faint, silvery physical scars on her arm and abdomen as a permanent reminder, found deep healing in her daughter's innocent smile, in the unwavering, tender love of her husband and father, and in the rediscovered sense of safety and belonging within her neighborhood. In Lily's bright, airy nursery above the crib hung Olivia's cherished childhood sketch, Lily and Grandpa's Big Day Out. Dar. Beside it, a new, vibrant watercolor Olivia had painted during the later stages of her recovery, a beautiful, whimsical depiction of their own cozy house, with a smiling Lily, waving from a flower-boxed window titled simply Lily's Safe Haven. A single perfectly pressed yellow pansy, salvaged by Liam from the decorative planter Karen had so publicly complained about, was framed in a small silver locket that Olivia now wore, a quiet personal symbol of resilience and defiance against petty cruelty. Willow Creek Springs, finally free from Karen Bishop's tyrannical and toxic reign, began to breathe again to heal. The HOA was completely restructured, its focus shifting from punitive NIT-picking enforcement to genuine community-building support and open communication. The annual Potluck the following year was a testament to this profound change, a joyful, relaxed, and genuinely warm affair, filled with easy laughter, shared stories, and a palpable sense of communal relief, with new sensible safety protocols for food handling discreetly in place, implemented without fuss by the new democratically elected board. Michael watched Olivia radiant and happy, her eyes clear and bright, bouncing a giggling, chubby Lily on her lap, surrounded by a circle of supportive, smiling friends. Olivia caught his eye across the bustling room and smiled a pure, untainted joy that reached deep into his soul. "She'll grow up surrounded by love." "Dad," she'd said with quiet conviction when they brought Lily home from the hospital, her voice thick with emotion. "No one will ever make her feel unsafe or unwelcome here again." The memory of that horrific day, the searing pain, the acrid smell would never fully disappear, but it no longer held the power to overshadow the present or dim the future. The lingering effect was not one of bitterness or fear, but of a quiet, steely resilience, a testament to a father's fierce, unwavering love and the specialized knowledge that had painstakingly brought a cruel, calculating woman to justice. It was a powerful, sobering reminder that even in the most ordinary, sun-dappled suburban settings, darkness could lurk, but also that it could be confronted exposed and ultimately overcome by courage community and the unwavering methodical pursuit of truth. Lily's soft, happy coos echoing in the sunlit room were the sweetest victory, a vibrant, joyful sound that promised a future filled with boundless hope, love, and laughter.